What if a forgotten paper tucked inside an old library book could let you decide how fast the world's money grows? Imagine that you could turn the tide of the economy with a single line of code, and that line could be written in a dusty notebook found in a second-hand shop. It sounds like a dream or a dare, but for Mara Linton, a 27-year-old cashier in a quiet town, it became the only hope she could see. Mara lived in a house that creaked on winter nights. Her mother had worked as a nurse for 20 years, but the pandemic had left them with debts that seemed to grow each month. Mara's job paid enough for groceries, but it never left any room for the future. The world felt as if it were a cycle of bills and bills, each one a weight that pulled her deeper into uncertainty. She had no savings, no plan, and her nights were often spent staring at the ceiling, wishing for a way out that didn't involve another long shift behind the register. One rainy afternoon, while searching for a spare wallet in the library's lost and a found box, Mara found an old journal. The cover was cracked and the pages were yellowed, but the handwriting inside was sharp and precise. She skimmed the first page, the forgotten inflationary formula. It was a title that made her heart pound. The note that followed was simple. When the base currency is increased by X, the purchasing power of the existing money shrinks. If X is set to the rate of desired growth, inflation follows. In other words, you can decide when the economy inflates and for how long by controlling X. Mara's fingers trembled as she read. She had never even heard the word inflation before, except in headlines that sounded like curses. What if I could control it? She whispered to the empty library. The idea grew louder in her mind, louder than the hum of the fluorescent lights. She closed the journal and ran home, her stomach twisting with a mix of excitement and dread. That night she began to research. The formula was not a rumor. It was an actual theory, written by an obscure economist named Dr. Alistair Finch, who disappeared after a scandal involving a failed investment scheme in the 1970s. The internet, however, had a few forums where scholars discussed Finch's work. Mara found an old thread in a closed group, written by someone who claimed to have studied Finch's notes in secret. The post was written by a user named Professor Fuchs, a pseudonym that felt like a whisper. Flux described how the formula was a set of simple equations that could be translated into a computer program. The trick was to find a small, isolated market where the effect could be tested. Flux offered to guide Mara through the steps. He was careful, always reminding her that money was a living thing and tinkering with it could change lives. Mara took the risk. She wrote a small program that would adjust the interest rate for small local loans by a fraction calculated from the formula. It was a crude simulation, but she tested it on a virtual bank account that mirrored her own. The results were startling. A few days later, the balance in her account grew by 10%. The program, using Finch's X value, had tricked the system into paying her interest at a rate that was not set by the bank, but by the invisible hand she had conjured. Her hand shook with joy and fear. She tried again, this time with a friend who had a small savings account. The money grew even faster, but each success brought a new feeling, like a child tasting the sweetness of a forbidden fruit. She could see the potential. If she could control inflation in a larger market, she could help people who were drowning in debt, or perhaps she could create a new wealth that would change her life forever. But as her experiments grew larger, the shadows grew darker. The small towns she targeted began to feel the pinch. Prices of bread, gas, and medicine rose, but people who worked hard could not keep up. The local newspaper ran a story about unexplained price hikes, and a town council meeting erupted in frustration. Mara watched the town's children get new lunch prices that were higher than their parents could afford. Her heart sank. She felt the weight of responsibility that her success had brought. One evening, while looking over a map of her target region, Flux's message appeared on her screen. "You are playing with forces you don't fully understand," he warned. "Inflation is a double-edged sword. The more you wield it, the more you risk the entire system. And there are others who have learned about your experiments. They want to use the formula for their own gain." Mara's stomach tightened. She realized that her experiments had not stayed hidden. The data leaks were obvious to anyone with the right tools. She saw a shadow of a corporation named Global Bank, a multinational that had long wanted to push inflation to increase profits from its debt. They were watching her. The next day, Mara found a strange message in her inbox from an account she did not recognize. It read, "We have the formula. You have the power. Join us and we can reshape the world." The email was signed by someone named Finch, a name that matched the economist whose work she had studied. The message sent a shiver down her spine. She knew she had a choice. She could let the formula work on its own and see how the world would transform. Or she could stop the experiments before they caused more harm. She had seen the small towns suffer. She also had seen the potential to lift people out of poverty. But the price of using the formula was the health of the economy. If it spiraled out of control, everyone could lose everything. Mara called her mother. Her voice was shaky. "Mom, I found something that could change everything, but I'm scared. I don't know if I should keep going." Her mother looked at her with tearful eyes. "You have always had a heart bigger than your wallet. Just don't lose yourself in the money. The world is not about how much you have, but how much you can give." The next morning, Mara walked to the town's library, the place where she had found the journal. The library's old oak door opened with a creak, and inside the smell of paper and dust welcomed her. She went straight to the shelf where she had found the journal, opened the page that mentioned the formula, and read again. The words felt like a promise. She decided to use the formula, but only as a tool to help people in need, not as a weapon to profit from. She worked with a local community bank, a non-profit organization, and a coalition of small businesses. They agreed to use the formula to create a controlled, moderate inflation in their district. The plan was to raise prices just enough that the money would spread more widely, giving low-income families more opportunities to buy food and medicine without borrowing from predatory lenders. The first week of the controlled inflation was shaky. Prices rose, but people had a new income from the increased money supply. The bank's customers began to invest more, and the local economy got a boost. The council, seeing the positive effect, held a town hall to discuss the next steps. They debated the ethics and consequences of using such a powerful tool. Some argued that it was dangerous, while others saw it as a way to level the playing field. Mara, however, watched closely. She felt the weight of her responsibility. In the middle of the week, a large corporation sent a representative to the town hall, demanding that the community adopt a similar inflation plan on a global scale. They offered to pay the town a large sum if they gave up their control. The town's leaders were tempted by the money, but Mara stepped forward. "We are not a toy for your profits," he said. "Our economy is our own. We will only change it if it helps our people, not our investors." The meeting ended with a unanimous decision. The town would proceed with its controlled inflation plan, but on a smaller scale and only for as long as it proved beneficial. The corporation backed off, disappointed but unable to force the change. In the months that followed, Mara's community flourished. The program created a ripple effect. Farmers could afford better seeds, small businesses could hire more staff, and the local school received new funds for classrooms. The controlled inflation kept the economy in motion, but it never ran amok. People's lives improved, and Mara felt a peace she had never known before. However, the world outside kept watching. Some government began to study Finch's formula. Others whispered about the dangers of unrestrained use. Mara's story spread like a spark, igniting debates about the ethics of manipulating money. Years later, when the town's council asked her to write a report about the experiment, she wrote a simple message. "Money is like water. It can be a lifesaver or a flood. The trick is not how much you have, but how you choose to use it." The forgotten inflationary formula was a reminder that money, like any force, depends on the hands that wield it. It invites us to ask, would you use such power to help those in need, or would you be tempted to grow your own fortune at the expense of others? The choice, like the economy, is fragile and depends on the hearts that steer it.
Found this interesting? Subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, share it out, and drop your questions or ideas in the comments. Until our next adventure.